What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over blast lines and more stock and lives. So basically stock and lives part 2. Today specifically we'll be covering how to lose lives and update our lives on the HUD. So we had functionality to remove a life upon death, and that was good, but we had no way to die, so we actually couldn't represent this logic. We were just basically showing our HUD elements in the last episode. But now I've updated it to where everyone can see the amount of stock that they have, and if you go into a blast line, you die. Now this is very simple behavior. Of course there's more complex things that go into blast lines and things like that, but at their core they're basically a barrier at the edges of the map that when the player collides with them, they are KO'd. They are knocked out, they are dead even, whatever you want to call it. And that is what we're doing today. So our camera does not follow any player logic right now or anything like that. So it's a little hard to show you. But I've placed blast lines, which I'll show you, when we get to that part of the episode, around the map. And if I am to fall off the map and collide with the blast line, then I lose a life. And this goes for all players. Now at this point we would have to respawn them. And we will be doing that in the next episode with a little platform that comes down. But there you go. You can see that we're losing lives. Player 1 and 4 now have 2 lives instead of 3. And it doesn't really matter what character we are. They will all lose their icons. You can see here that player 3 lost 2 lives as opposed to 1. This is just because we did not actually destroy him when he went into the blast line. We just called lose life. We should respawn him and make it so he doesn't hit any other blast lines, but I haven't done that yet, and we'll do that when we go to respawn them because the logic is going to be connected. Alright, so let's get into it today. There's only going to be a few changes I make in the character HUD to adjust some of the logic that we had. The majority of the stuff is just going to be setting up the blast lines and going over exactly why I wanted it to do this way and what functionality this gets us. So first things first, if you have not seen any previous episodes of the series, you may want to catch up. There's still plenty more to do, as you can tell, but I figured I'd point that out in case you want to catch up. I'll leave a link in this iCard right here to the very first episode and to the entire playlist of the Super Smash Brothers tutorial series. If you don't care about that, but you just care about blast lines, then here's part 1 for stocks and lives. You want to at least watch that because we are going to be using some of that logic in today's episode. Okay, so in part 1 of stocks and lives, we had the integer lives, and we had this function called lose life. I made it blueprint callable. And then in the CPP, in the constructor, we set lives to be 3 by default. You can set it to be whatever you want, of course. I think 3 is a good default. And then in lose life, we subtracted 1 life. We decremented lives, which subtracts 1 from it. Then we got a game mode reference and called notify HUD update lives on the game mode with the player number. So basically we could send the integer of the player that is losing a life and the value to update on the HUD. So if it's player 1 that lost a life, update player 1's lives to their new lives value. And we were doing all this, and this is all good. We don't have to change anything here. I'm just covering this again because we didn't really get to use it. We had nowhere to call lose life last time. We had no way to die. Now we're going to die when we collide with a blast line. So that's what the blast lines are going to accomplish for us today. Okay? I just wanted you to remember this and be aware of how we were handling that. Now let's go into Unreal. We don't have to change anything in code right now. And we will go into, we'll actually create the blast line first. Let's do that before anything else. I think that'll make more sense. So I went to where I wanted my blast line to be. And I hit add new, blueprint class, blueprint class. And then I just made an actor. It doesn't really need to do anything else. It just is going to be a barrier. We will define all the logic in there that we want, and we can make them as complex or as simple as we want, but for now, we just need them to be an actor. I called it blast line BP, and then I opened it up, and in the viewport, you can see I just had this big wall. So I've added a box collision. So if you add component and type box collision right here. I just called it box, but you can call it whatever you want. Barrier, collider, collision, whatever. And I made it pretty big. I made it scale of 1 by 50 by 50. You don't have to make it this size. This is just the default size I made for the barrier. Technically, you're fighting on a 2D plane, so you don't really need any depth here if you don't want it. I made it big just in case. I always like to, you know, I'd rather perform more logic that is not needed than less than is needed. So if for whatever reason we somehow got lodged out into like the left or right, then we'd still be able to hit the blast line. That should be impossible, but I figured I would bring it up. But anyway, so I just made it this default size. You can obviously change it for each map, especially the height. That's the important one here. And the logic in it is very, very simple. So since we have this box collision, that collider will automatically be overlap all dynamic. The actual scene route won't have any sort of collision that you can change. So you can kind of leave it as is. But if you are to right click in your graph, you can do event actor begin overlap right here. You could do the component as well, but we don't want the component here. We want anything that touches this actor to fire this off. Now right now we only have a box, but if we make this more complicated down the line, then we may need to change it. So it's subject to change if necessary, but I don't believe we will ever need to. So once you have actor begin overlap, we're just going to drag off of other actor, cast it to our default Super Smash Brothers template character. We don't want a specific character, we don't want any of the blueprint classes, because we want to make sure any character that touches this performs this functionality. So if this cast succeeds and it is a character touching this, then we want to call lose life on that character. Remember, this is why we made lose life blueprint callable. And it's as simple as that. That will perform the lose life logic. But you still won't be able to see it yet in your game if you were to play now, just based off of the first episode alone, simply because we don't have enough logic put in place yet. Let's figure out what we need to change to make sure that we can actually see our lives being lost. Now, first things first, we actually need to just set up our blast lines. So we can go into our levels and remove the walls and add blast lines. I did not do this for the other level, for the default level. So, well, now I clicked out of it. So if I were to go on this level, right now it is still closed in. I technically could put a blast line up top, and that would be where I could put it, but I'll probably remove the walls. I just wanted to show you how to do it for one level. Obviously, the way you do it and where you put them will be different for you. Alright, there's a lot going on here because there's these light mass volumes that are automatically in these levels. You can hit the little eyeball on the world outliner to get rid of them. Not get rid of them, to make them invisible. Now the boxes that are left are the blast lines. I actually should have one up top. I thought I did have one up top, but maybe I deleted it. Whoops. I definitely thought I had one up top. I apologize. Let me add this one now. Maybe I did not save it. Something like this, though. You basically are going to make a box out of your blast lines, and if you want certain sides to be closer to the blast lines than others, that's perfectly fine. It all depends on your stage and how you want to set it up. So I put them to the left, right, below, and up top. You don't need all these, again, depending on your stage. For me, you can just walk off the map. So you can hit the left, you can hit the right, you can fall straight down, hit the bottom. You can get launched high enough to hit the top, so I wanted it in just a square. Alright, now for this, the way you add these is very simple. You can just go to your blueprint, blast line BP, and drag it into the scene. Now, I've already got mine set up, but see this one right here? This is your default blast line. So I got the shape pretty close to what my default stage is. I said, why don't I just make it the whole thing? And I just increased the scale right here. So I think it's the... Nope. It's the Y in this case. So the Y... There you go. I can make it as big as I want. I can make it as tall or as short as I want. and technically as thick as I want, but it's not really necessary for now. So I'm going to delete this 5th one out of here, but basically just put them in each corner. They can overlap, they don't have to. You adjust it to your liking. Again, this is just for collision for when they go out of bounds. So basically you should just make sure that whenever you think they'd be automatically KO'd, you have these set up. So I've got 1, 2, 3, and 4. Alright. Now once they're in the scene, you're good to go. You can return to the main menu. And excellent. Now we should be able, they're not visible in the game. If you wanted to represent them somehow, you could add a little image, you could add a mesh that had no collision. There's a lot of things you can do if you wanted to represent them, but you don't have to. And now let's go ahead and fix up our HUD and our game mode to make sure that we can actually see the lives being lost, or if we needed to, being gained, like if there was an item that gained us a life. Okay, so let's start in the base game mode BP. Now, in the last episode, we were doing some logic to, I mean, the game mode has been going on for a long time, so most of this has come from previous episodes. Alright, so I'm not going to cover all this. If you want to catch up on all the game mode stuff, then you can check it out in prior episodes within the series. I believe specifically a lot of this was done for the multiplayer episode, because that's how we determined what characters were spawning and things like that. But what I did want to change from last episode, okay? I made a mistake, and I was creating the character HUD at the end of this loop. Well, this is bad to do, because, first of all, if I create it too late, then I don't have a reference to it for when I need to use it. And I realized that I wanted to call update stock, which is our character HUD function that we made in the last episode. It looks a little bit different now, and I'll go over why this is much easier. But the update stock function is the function we made in the last episode. When I want to call update stock actually on begin play, because we have the default of 3 stocks, 3 lives. But, you know, when we're loading into the scene, say I have 99 lives that I put up. Well, you know, I need to be able to represent that before the HUD starts showing the value, because otherwise it'll look a little janky. It'll go from 3 or 5 lives, however many you set up, to 99, and it just looks weird. You want to have it set up before the player can see the HUD. That way they don't have to see any sort of like flicker with it or your lives changing. Honestly, it just looks much better. So it's a small change, but I think it makes a big difference. So if you want to fix that and make it so you can have it this way, let me show you what I've done. So in begin play of our game mode, this is all stuff that we've done in the past. But now, after I create the game instance, I'm actually creating a character HUD widget here, as opposed to after the characters are spawned. Now this is good for local multiplayer. We only need to create 1 HUD and spawn it. When we get into network multiplayer, this will be slightly different, but we can still have the same logic that we have here. So this is still applicable. I create my character HUD widget. This is create widget from class. Oops, sorry. Create widget from class, or just create widget, excuse me. And then you choose the class, and I chose my HUD. Then I have a variable for my HUD, which we had last episode, but what you can do is drag off your return value and hit promote to variable. I called it HUD reference. And I'm doing one other thing here that I wasn't doing in the last episode. So not only did we move it from this for loop, the completed of this for each loop, to the beginning of begin play here, but I also added another variable in the HUD called game mode reference. So I found out this neat little way that it's a little bit better, and it will fix timing issues that we've sometimes had in the past, where we had to kind of get around knowing when a begin play would end. So without going into it too far, if you have a game mode or any class that's calling begin play and creates an object in their begin play, the object is not considered valid until the begin play is completed, or until it gets a reference to that type. So I was casting to the game mode in the construct of the character HUD, and I've now taken that out. Instead, what I'm doing is just setting, I have this variable called game mode reference in the HUD, and I was setting this after a cast to the base game instance. But we're creating the character HUD in the game mode, so we already have the game mode reference. So instead of waiting for begin play, instead of dealing with timing issues, we can clean this up very, very much. All we have to do is make it, we already have the game mode reference, but we don't need to cast, get game mode cast, and set here. You can see I just completely removed that part from the construct. Instead, what I've done is off the HUD reference, I just go set game mode reference right here, and I just pass in self as the game mode reference. We're in the base game mode. This is the game mode reference. So get a reference to self and pass that in. And now that will fix the timing issues. This will allow us to update the HUD before the characters are spawned. So I know this was a bit of a weird change, but it's very, very important that you do this. It will just make things a lot cleaner if you do. Okay, so wherever you were doing this before in the game mode, if it was at the end of begin play here in the loops, take it out of that and put it right here. Doesn't have to be directly here, but just make sure it's before you call your spawn player functions. Okay? Now, you'll notice we have not added this to the viewport yet. Now, we have not added it to the viewport yet because I want to call update stock on it before we do. Remember, that's the whole reason we're doing this, is we want to create the widget, we want to get the appropriate values, and we want to make sure we accurately represent the lives that the players have before we update it. That way there's no flicker, there's no ugliness going on. So this is part one of what we had to do. Then, there's 3 parts. So part 2, I had another mistake. In this for each loop, I was actually going from spawn player to the next for each loop. We don't need to do that. There's no reason to do that. Technically, it wasn't hurting anything, but it's just extra logic that we didn't need. So you might as well disconnect. If you have a connection from spawn player to your next for each loop, you might as well just disconnect that and just bring it from completed instead. Okay, that's just a lot cleaner of a way to do it, and it's gonna help us from having any bugs in the long run. That's part 2. Now part 3, and the last thing we need to do to get this working, is to call update stock. Now I wanted to call update stock once everything else was done and begin play. The reason I wanted to do this is because I want the characters to be spawned first, and I want their references to be set, which they're set right here in this loop. So once the loop is completed, I know it's safe to call set initial stock. If we have the character references, we have their player number integer, and we also have the amount of lives that they have. So we know we have all the data we need to update the HUD. And that's why I wanted to call this afterward. But I don't want to call it in the loop, otherwise set initial stock will get called for every character, every loop here. So especially if you have 8 characters, it's going to get called 8 times, which is just completely unnecessary. So let's just go into, once the final loop is completed and begin play here. Then I made a function. Technically, I made an event, excuse me. I've added custom event, just like this. And I've called it set initial stock. And here I'm calling it. So you can drag off your completed and say set initial stock. And there you go, call function. Alright, and now here's the event right here, set initial stock. So we are going to be looping through the players, but we want to loop through afterward, that way we're not mixing up the logic while we're on the go here. So, here's the set initial stock event. I loop through my players. During the loop, I call update stock and pass in the HUD reference with the player number of the player that we are updating. This is what update stock requires. See, in the update stock function, I have the player number, and that's how I know how to obtain the proper value. Because if we're looping through the players array is the actual references, and the player numbers like player 1, player 2, player 3, player 4. Alright, so we just call update stock on loop body, and then on completed, we finally add it to the viewport. This is saying we've done everything we needed to do. All the characters have been updated appropriately and accordingly. Now we can add this widget to the viewport and actually see the character HUD. So sorry about all those changes, guys, but I think it's important I mention them now because these things will just make the game so much cleaner. First of all, it changes it from a timing solution to an actual event-driven solution, which is way, way better in coding. If you're not familiar, it is way better, and I should have been doing it from the start, so I apologize for that. But now it is fixed, and now our HUD looks good. We can actually fall off and die and lose stock. So that is much better. Now there is one thing I want to go over in the character HUD as well, just to make your life a lot easier and to make this, again, a lot cleaner. However, this is not necessary if you don't want to do it. This is just to make it a little bit easier, especially the more characters you have, because you're going to have a lot of the same logic. So I figured, why not convert this to a function? So in the last episode, we had all this already. But this... we only had it this switch going off of the 0 branch in it. So only if the case was equal to 0 here, so the player number was the first player, were we changing anything about the lives. This is the functionality you probably have in here. I simply copied this over from the update stock function. I made a new function and copied it into there and just passed along the canvas reference. That way I can just pass in the stock icon canvas as opposed to performing this logic. This is the same logic for every single character minus the canvas we use it from. You see, I only pass in the different canvas. Player 1, player 2, player 3, player 4. So I made a function out of it. If you want to do this, just go up to your functions, create a new function. I called mine set stock visibility. And it takes in inputs of a canvas panel, I called it canvas reference, and an integer, which of course I call lives. The canvas panel is what we get all the children from, loop through, and set the visibility. And then the lives, of course, is what's checked against to determine if that icon should be visible or not. That's pretty much all it takes. I just, made a function and copied it in there. And then I brought my player 1 stock icon canvas, player 2 stock icon canvas, and 3 and 4 in here. So now all players can actually accurately represent their stock. So there you go, guys. You don't have to do that, but if you'd like to make it a little bit neater and a little bit easier to read, then that's how you can do it. The very last change I made was I converted the game mode to a validated get. It'll probably look like this on yours. Just this little node right here. You can right click on a game mode reference and convert to validated get. And that's what I did in here. This basically just means if the game mode reference is invalid, it won't try and do this other logic. Now, it shouldn't be invalid the way we set it up, but sometimes I like to add little safety checks just in case, because I don't want to cause a crash. Alright guys, and that's all I got for today. This will, if you followed this episode, you'll be able to actually use blast lines to take away lives from our characters, and the lives will be, the HUD will be indicative of the actual characters and the lives that they have remaining. So in the next episode, we will be able to actually respawn the characters. We'll bring down a little platform just in Super Smash Brothers style, and they will only be able to lose 1 life because once they hit the blast line, we will automatically start the respawn logic, which will make them impervious to other blast lines or other forms of death. Yeah, that's all I got for you today, guys. So if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. It does more for the series than anything else you can do, and I just really appreciate it. I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership and Patreon supporters. Thank you guys so much for all the love and support. You guys really help me keep these series going, and I just really, really appreciate it. So thank you so much for taking the extra time. Lastly, guys, if you want to come see some programming live streams, we do live streams every Friday here on YouTube, and I'm making a side scroller that it's heavily inspired by Castlevania. So if you're interested in that type of game, you might want to come check it out. It's 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time every Friday. Alright guys, that's all I got for you, so thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.